Paris tonight, another summit once again places Ukraine at the centre of international attention. Leaders arrived at the Élysée Palace under the gaze of cameras, with every handshake and every motorcade meant to project both unity and urgency. Yet behind the ceremonial images lies a debate that strikes at the very core of Europe's security and energy future. At the heart of that debate is a blunt message delivered by Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. Speaking to journalists after a conversation with Donald Trump and European leaders, Zelensky revealed that the former US president is deeply unhappy about Europe's continued purchases of Russian oil. In his own words, President Trump is very dissatisfied that Russia's oil is being purchased by Europe. Among others, there are two countries. We know that these are Hungary and Slovakia. Everyone knows it is these countries. That remark was more than a passing comment. It was a deliberate spotlight on the rifts within Europe, where sanctions designed to strangle Moscow's war economy have been unevenly applied. The European Union has banned most Russian oil shipped by sea, but pipeline imports remain exempt. And it is those pipelines stretching across Hungary and Slovakia that continue to pump crude into Europe, providing both lifeline and loophole. For Washington and for Kiev, the stakes could not be higher. Every barrel sold is another source of funding for Moscow's war machine. Every tanker unloaded, every pipeline shipment delivered represents fuel that helps power the Kremlin's artillery, drones and missiles. That is why Trump's dissatisfaction voiced directly to Zelensky carries weight. It signals that American patience with Europe's half measures is wearing thin. The pressure is not only economic, it is deeply political. Trump has consistently argued that Europe cannot rely on the United States for security while simultaneously sending billions to Russia through its energy purchases. For him, the contradiction is glaring. On one hand, NATO allies plead for more American support and military hardware for Ukraine. On the other hand, parts of Europe continue to bankroll Russia's budget through oil imports. It is a narrative Trump has embraced to emphasize what he calls Europe's double standards. In Europe itself, the picture is more complicated. Leaders in Hungary and Slovakia insist they are not defying the sanctions regime, but merely using exemptions designed for them. Both countries are landlocked, heavily dependent on Russian pipelines, and argue they have no viable short-term alternatives. Prime Minister Viktor Orban of Hungary has been the most vocal, portraying his stance as pragmatic, keeping Hungarian families warm and factories running through a time of energy instability. Slovakia, similarly, claims it is buying time to diversify. But to critics, these explanations sound like excuses. They argue that both Budapest and Bratislava are undermining European unity and giving Moscow the very lifeline it needs. For Zelensky, the case is clear. Oil revenues equal war revenues, and the longer they flow, the longer the war drags on. His message in Paris was aimed not just at leaders around the table, but also at the European public, a reminder that energy choices have battlefield consequences. The question now is whether Europe is prepared to go further. Some countries, like Poland and the Baltic states, have long argued for a complete embargo, regardless of cost. Germany has rushed to build liquefied natural gas terminals. France is rebooting nuclear facilities, and Italy is investing in alternatives from North Africa. Yet even with these moves, energy prices have soared, households have felt the pinch, and protests have erupted over inflation and fuel bills. These pressures make further sanctions politically risky. For Trump, however, the calculus is simpler. He has little patience for European hesitation and sees the issue as a test of credibility. By continuing to import Russian oil, Europe weakens the very sanctions it claims are essential. For him, it is not just an economic problem, but a geopolitical one, a sign that Europe is unwilling to bear the costs of its own defence. Inside the Élysée Palace, French President Emmanuel Macron tried to cast the summit as proof of Europe's resilience and resolve. Nearly 30 nations were represented, all pledging support for Ukraine's defence and security. Yet Zelensky's remarks about Trump's dissatisfaction ensured that energy remained the elephant in the room. Behind the polite language of communique and press releases, leaders are divided on how far to go in cutting ties with Moscow. The backdrop is grim. On the ground in Ukraine, Russian missiles continue to pound cities, while Kiev scrambles for more air defence systems and long-range weapons. Zelensky's argument is that cutting oil revenues could shorten the war. But for many European capitals already balancing fragile economies, the choice is far from straightforward. How do you weaken Russia without triggering a deeper economic crisis at home? The dynamics in Brussels highlight this dilemma. Sanctions require unanimity, giving Orban and his allies significant leverage. Each new package of restrictions sparks long nights of negotiation, where Hungary often extracts concessions in exchange for agreement. For Ukraine and its allies, this amounts to obstruction. For Orban, it is national self-preservation. Slovakia takes a similar line, but with less political theatre, quietly insisting on the same exemptions. And so, the Paris summit became not just a meeting about military aid, but about whether the alliance can remain united under growing strain. Trump's involvement raises the stakes further, introducing an American dimension that Europe cannot ignore. With the US already providing the bulk of military assistance to Ukraine, any perception of European weakness risks shifting the transatlantic balance. What emerges from this picture is a geopolitical chessboard where barrels of oil matter as much as tanks or missiles. Every decision in Brussels or Budapest, every statement in Paris or Washington reverberates far beyond energy markets. It shapes the future of the war, the stability of Europe, and the credibility of NATO itself. Zelensky's reminder delivered in Paris was stark. Energy is not neutral, it is a weapon. And as long as Russian oil continues to flow into Europe, that weapon remains in the Kremlin's hands. Trump's dissatisfaction adds urgency, a warning that patience may be running out across the Atlantic. Tonight, as the lights of Paris shine over the Elysee, the question remains unresolved. Will Europe choose unity over dependence, sanctions over survival, principle over pragmatism? Or will the pipelines running through Hungary and Slovakia continue to divide, feeding both Moscow's war machine and Europe's internal contradictions? What is certain is this: the war in Ukraine is no longer fought only on the front lines. It is fought in parliaments, in energy markets, and in the corridors of summits like the one in Paris. And as Zelensky made clear, the choices Europe makes today will shape not only Ukraine's fate, but the future of the continent itself. President Trump is very dissatisfied that Russia's oil is being purchased by Europe. Among others, there are two countries. We know that these are Hungary and Slovakia. Everyone knows it is these countries.